Welcome to Vietnamese Vixens. Today we're talking about a statistic that should terrify every man considering retirement in Southeast Asia. 84.4% of Western retirees leave Vietnam broke. Not struggling, not financially stressed, completely broke. Empty bank accounts, maxed credit cards, nothing left but a plane ticket home and a story nobody wants to hear. This is Henrik's story. 63 years old, retired civil engineer from Rotterdam, Netherlands. He thought his pension would make him a king in Vietnam. Thought he'd spend his golden years in comfort and companionship. Thought he'd finally figured out how to live well on what he had. He was wrong about everything. Before we get into Henrik's story, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. Have you seen this happen to someone you know? Maybe you've watched a friend or relative chase the retirement dream in Southeast Asia only to come back broken. Hit that like button if this topic hits close to home, and subscribe if you want more real stories about the mathematics of ruin that nobody talks about until it's too late. Alright, let's get into it. Here's Henrik's story, in his own words. I landed in Da Nang on a Wednesday morning in September, 2 years into my retirement, and the first thing I noticed was the warmth. Not just the temperature, though that hit me hard coming from Rotterdam, where autumn already had teeth. I mean the warmth of the place itself. The way the taxi driver smiled at me like I was a person instead of a fare. The way the city sprawled out along the coast with mountains rising green in the distance. The way the air smelled like the ocean mixed with grilling meat and coffee and something floral I couldn't identify. I was 61 years old. I'd worked for the same engineering firm for 38 years. Done everything right. Saved my money. Paid into my pension. Lived modestly in a small apartment in a gray part of Rotterdam where the rain fell sideways most of the year. My wife had died 6 years earlier. Cancer, quick and brutal. My daughter lived in Amsterdam with her family. We talked once a week, saw each other every few months. I wasn't unhappy exactly. Just empty. Going through the motions of a life that had already happened. My pension was 1,800 euros a month. In the Netherlands, that's nothing. That's a shitty apartment and careful budgeting and no luxuries ever. That's watching every euro and still feeling like you're barely holding on. But I've been reading the expat blogs and forums, watching the YouTube channels. Guys my age living in Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, looking tanned and happy and 20 years younger. They talked about how far a euro stretched in Southeast Asia, how you could live like a king on a pension that made you a pauper back home. So I researched. Picked Da Nang because it wasn't as touristy as Ho Chi Minh City or Hanoi. Found an apartment through an expat Facebook group. 1 bedroom, furnished, air conditioning, 10 minutes from the beach. 300 euros a month, including utilities. 300 euros for something that would cost 1,500 back home. The math was intoxicating. I bought a one-way ticket. My daughter thought I was insane. Asked what I was running from. I told her I wasn't running from anything. I was running towards something. Toward warmth and possibility and a life where my money actually mattered. She didn't understand. How could she? She was young, had her career, had her family. She didn't know what it felt like to be 61 and invisible and eating alone in the same kitchen every night, wondering if this was all there was left. The first 6 months in Da Nang were everything I'd hoped for. Better than I'd hoped for. I'd wake up to sunshine pouring through my windows instead of gray Dutch rain. I'd walk to a local cafe and get a banh mi and coffee for less than 2 euros. I'd sit there watching the city wake up. Motorbikes flooding the streets, vendors setting up their carts, life happening all around me in bright, chaotic color. My monthly budget was absurdly comfortable. 300 for rent, 200 for food, 100 for utilities and phone. Another 100 for entertainment, coffee, beer, the occasional nice meal. I had 1,000 euros left over every month. 1,000 euros that just sat in my account growing because I didn't need it. For the first time in my adult life, I felt wealthy. I joined the expat community. There's a strong Dutch presence in Da Nang, which made the transition easier. We'd meet at beach bars on Friday evenings, drink cheap beer, complain about the heat and the traffic and the language barrier in that performative way expats do when we're actually deliriously happy with our choices. Most of the guys were like me, retired, divorced, or widowed, living on pensions that stretched impossibly far in Vietnam. But I started noticing something in those early months. A pattern. Most of the expats had girlfriends. Young Vietnamese girlfriends, not just a few years younger, decades younger. The guy would be 65 and his girlfriend would be 30. He'd be 70 and she'd be 28. They'd show up to the beach bars together, The girl always beautiful, always attentive, always touching his arm and laughing at his jokes, and making him look like the luckiest man in the world. I'd watch and feel something complicated twist in my chest. Part judgment, part envy, part curiosity. The other guys talked about it openly. How they met their girls. How much they help with family expenses. The unspoken transactional nature of it all. Though nobody said the word transaction out loud. They'd laugh about it, make jokes, but underneath was this desperate pride. This need to believe it was real, or real enough, or at least a fair exchange. The warning started early. An Australian named Dave pulled me aside one night after a few beers. Said he'd been in Vietnam 5 years and watched dozens of guys get cleaned out. Same pattern every time. Meet a sweet girl. She's different from the bar girls, works a real job, comes from a good family. Slowly the requests start. Family emergencies, medical bills, business opportunities. The guy gives and gives because walking away means admitting he's been played. Then one day he wakes up broke and she's gone, and he's sitting in a cheap room wondering how he got so stupid so fast. I thanked Dave for the concern, but told him I wasn't looking for a girlfriend anyway. I was just enjoying life, taking it easy, not trying to recapture my youth or buy companionship. He gave me this look I couldn't quite read. Something between pity and recognition, like he'd heard the same thing from himself years earlier. But I was lying to Dave and to myself. I was lonely, deeply, achingly lonely in a way I hadn't let myself acknowledge back in Rotterdam. The sunshine and cheap food and comfortable budget were wonderful, but they didn't fill the silence in my apartment at night, didn't give me someone to talk to share meals with, to make me feel like I mattered to someone somewhere. I'd see the other expats with their girlfriends and feel that envy sharpen. They looked happy. They looked needed. The girls would fuss over them, worry about their health, make sure they ate properly, treat them like they were important. It didn't matter that it was probably transactional. It looked like love from the outside, and after 6 years of being alone, that started seeming like enough. I told myself I'd be smarter than the guys Dave warned me about. I wouldn't be desperate, wouldn't be obvious, wouldn't throw money around trying to buy affection. If something happened naturally, fine. But I wouldn't go looking for it. That was the lie I was telling myself when everything started. The comfortable lie that let me ignore every warning sign. I wasn't like those other guys. I was careful. Smart. Too experienced to fall for the obvious traps. 6 months into my Da Nang life, I was sitting at a beachside cafe watching the sunset paint the South China Sea orange and pink. An Australian expat I recognized from the Friday gatherings walked past with his girlfriend. He was maybe 62. She was probably 28. They were holding hands, laughing about something, looking at each other like the age gap didn't exist. She said something in Vietnamese, and he tried to repeat it and butchered the pronunciation, and they both cracked up. I sat there with my coffee going cold and thought, why not me? That was the moment. That was when I stopped being careful and started being vulnerable. When the loneliness got louder than the common sense. When I looked at my pension and my comfortable budget and thought maybe I could have what those other guys had. Maybe I deserved it after 38 years of doing everything right. Maybe this was what my retirement was supposed to look like. I finished my coffee and walked back to my apartment as the sky darkened over the ocean. My phone buzzed with a message from my daughter asking how I was doing. I told her everything was great. I was happy. Living the dream. She sent back a heart emoji and told me she loved me. I stood on my balcony looking out at the city lights and felt that dangerous combination of loneliness and hope and possibility. I didn't know it yet, but I was already setting myself up for the fall, already opening the door to something that would take everything I had. The mathematics of ruin don't start with the first dollar you give away. They start with the moment you decide you're willing to pay for companionship and convince yourself it's something else. I went to bed that night thinking about the Australian and his girlfriend, thinking about what it would feel like to have someone waiting for me somewhere, someone who smiled when I walked in, someone who made the silence go away. Why not me? I kept thinking. Why not me? That question would cost me everything. I met Han 3 weeks later at a coffee shop 2 blocks from my apartment. It was one of those modern Vietnamese places with minimalist decor and expensive espresso machines, the kind where young professionals worked on laptops all day. I'd started going there in the mornings because the Dutch guy who ran the Friday beach gatherings said the coffee was legitimately good, not just cheap. She was sitting at the table next to mine, wearing business clothes, working on a laptop with spreadsheets open, professional, focused. not dolled up like the girls I'd seen hanging around the expat bars. When the barista brought my coffee, he accidentally set it on her table instead of mine. We both reached for it at the same time and laughed at the confusion. That's how it started. A stupid accident. She apologized in perfect English, and we got talking. Her name was Han. She was 34, worked in accounting at one of the beachfront hotels, lived with her family in Hoa Can district. She asked what brought me to Vietnam. I gave her the standard answer about retirement and wanting somewhere warm. She smiled and said Da Nang was a good choice, then went back to her work. I should have left it there. But something about her felt different from what I'd expected. She wasn't flirty or forward. Didn't ask where I was from or how much my pension was or any of the questions I'd been warned about. Just polite conversation and then back to her spreadsheets. It felt normal. Real. I started going to that coffee shop every morning. She was there most days, always working, always professional. We'd exchange greetings, small talk about the weather or the traffic. After about a week, she asked if I wanted to join her table since we kept ending up next to each other anyway. We started having coffee together. She'd tell me about her work stress, the demanding hotel guests, her boss who expected miracles. I'd tell her about adjusting to life in Vietnam, my terrible attempts to learn Vietnamese, the chaos of trying to cross the street without getting hit by motorbikes. It felt easy, natural, like friendship without agenda. After 2 weeks of morning coffees, she suggested we get dinner sometime. Try a local place she loved that tourists never found. I said yes immediately. The restaurant was in a local neighborhood, plastic stools and fluorescent lights, and the best bon choux I'd had since arriving. She ordered for both of us, navigated the menu, translated when the owner came over to chat. Over dinner, she told me more about herself. She was a single mother, had a 7-year-old son named Min. The father had left when she was pregnant, moved to Hanoi, never looked back. She worked hard to support her son and help her parents who were getting older and needed financial support. I felt something shift in my chest. Sympathy, attraction, that dangerous combination. Here was a woman working a real job, raising a kid alone, supporting her family. Not some bar girl looking for a quick score, someone with substance. Responsibility. When the bill came, she grabbed it before I could, insisted on paying, said I was her guest and she'd invited me. That sealed it for me. I'd been warned that Vietnamese women would immediately expect foreign men to pay for everything. But Han paid, refused to let me contribute. I walked her to her motorbike afterward, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Not just attraction, respect, interest. The sense that maybe I'd found something real. We started seeing each other 2 or 3 times a week, always at local places, never the expat hangouts. She'd take me to hidden restaurants, quiet parks, temples where we'd sit and talk for hours. She asked about my life in Rotterdam, my marriage, my daughter. I asked about raising a son alone, what she wanted for her future, what kept her in Da Nang instead of moving to the bigger opportunities in Saigon or Hanoi. She never asked me for anything. When I offered to pay for dinner, she'd refuse or insist we split it. When I suggested I could help with something, she'd get almost offended, said she wasn't looking for a foreign man to solve her problems. She was doing fine on her own. Looking back now, I can see how perfectly calibrated it all was, how the refusals were setting me up to want to help even more, how her independence made me desperate to prove I could be useful. But at the time, it just felt like I'd finally met someone genuine, someone who liked me for me, not for my pension. The shift happened about 6 weeks into whatever we were building. We were having dinner at a small restaurant near the Han River when she got quiet, pushed her rice around her plate for a while without eating. I asked what was wrong. She looked up with tears in her eyes and said her mother had been diagnosed with diabetes, needed medication that wasn't fully covered by insurance. The family was trying to figure out how to afford it. She wasn't asking me for money, made that explicitly clear, just needed someone to talk to because she was stressed and worried. I felt my heart break for her. Asked how much the medication cost. She said about $200 a month. Her salary barely covered her son's expenses and helping her father with their rent. Adding her mother's medication felt impossible. I offered immediately. $200 was nothing to me. Less than I spent on coffee and beer most months. She refused. Got almost angry. Said she couldn't accept charity. She'd figure something out. Her family always had before. I pushed back gently. Told her it wasn't charity. It was what friends did for each other. That I had more than I needed and would feel terrible knowing her mother was suffering when I could help. She cried and thanked me and said she'd pay me back as soon as things stabilized. I told her there was no rush. Transferred the money that night. That was the first time. €200, nothing in the grand scheme of my budget. But it opened a door that I didn't realize couldn't be closed. 3 weeks later, her son needed school supplies and fees for a special program. €150. Then her brother had a motorbike accident and needed help with the hospital bill. €300. Then her father's blood pressure medication. Another 100. Each time she'd cry and apologize and promise to pay me back. Each time I'd tell her not to worry, that I was happy to help, that this was what people did when they cared about each other. And I did care about her. Maybe I was falling in love with her. She'd started staying over at my apartment sometimes. We'd cook dinner together, watch movies, talk until late. She'd tell me I was different from other foreign men, that I understood Vietnamese culture and family obligations in a way most expats didn't. That made me feel special, important. Like I'd figured out something the other guys at the beach bars hadn't. By month 4, I'd given her maybe €2,000 total. My monthly budget was tighter, but still manageable. I'd stopped saving the extra 1,000 every month, but I wasn't dipping into my savings yet. Just redistributing my pension to cover both my life and her family emergencies. It felt sustainable, temporary. Once her family's crisis period passed, things would balance out. Then her mother's diabetes got worse. She needed surgery. Something with her pancreas that I didn't fully understand but sounded serious. Life-threatening if left untreated. The surgery cost €5,000. Insurance would cover maybe half. The family was trying to pool resources but couldn't come up with the rest. Han Hei came to me crying. Said she knew it was too much to ask. That she'd already taken so much for my generosity. That she'd understand if I said no. But her mother might die without the surgery, and she didn't know what else to do. I didn't even hesitate. €5,000 was a lot, but it was her mother's life. How could I say no to that? I transferred the money from my Dutch savings account, watched my retirement fund drop from €85,000 to 80,000, told myself it was a one-time thing. An emergency. Not the beginning of a pattern. Han held me that night like I'd saved her entire world. Told me she loved me. That I was the most incredible man she'd ever met. That she didn't know how she'd ever repay me, but would spend the rest of her life trying. I held her and felt like a hero. Like I'd done something that actually mattered. My pension was just money. Her mother's life was everything. The requests kept coming. Slower at first, then accelerating. Her family was behind on rent, €1,200, or they'd be evicted. Her son needed dental work, €800. Her father's motorbike died and he needed it for work, €1,000. Each time with tears and documentation I couldn't read because it was all in Vietnamese. Each time with promises to pay me back. Each time I'd transfer the money and watch my savings account shrink. 80,000 became 75. 75 became 68. 68 became 55. I stopped checking the balances frequently because seeing the numbers drop made me anxious. But I'd already given so much. Walking away now would mean admitting it was all wasted. That I'd been played from the beginning. My ego couldn't handle that possibility. The other expats at the Friday gatherings started making comments. Dave the Australian pulled me aside after I'd been seeing Han for maybe 7 months. Asked if I was being careful with my money. Said he'd noticed I wasn't drinking as much as I used to. Wasn't going out for the nice dinners anymore. I told him I was fine. Just helping Han's family through a rough patch. He gave me that same look from months earlier. That mixture of pity and recognition. He told me about a British guy named Roger who'd been in Da Nang a few years back. Same story. Sweet girl with family emergencies. Roger gave and gave until his pension wasn't enough, so he started selling things back home. His house in Manchester, his car, his late wife's jewelry. Sent it all to Vietnam for various crises. Then one day he saw his girlfriend with another foreign man at a restaurant. Followed them. Found out she was working 3 or 4 expats the same way. Roger tried to kill himself 2 months later. Survived, went back to the UK. Broken. I thanked Dave for the concern and told him Han was different. Our situation was different. He nodded slowly and said, "That's what they all say. Every single one." I went home angry at Dave for projecting his cynicism onto my relationship. But lying in bed that night, staring at the ceiling with the air conditioner humming, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. My savings were down to €42,000. I'd given Han's family over 30,000 in 8 months. My pension was now tight every month because I was helping with her father's rent and her mother's medication and her son's school expenses. I wasn't saving anything anymore. Wasn't living the comfortable retirement I'd imagined. But I'd given so much already. Stopping now would mean it was all for nothing. So I kept going, kept transferring money, kept believing that once this crisis period ended, we'd build something real together, that my investment would pay off in companionship and love and a partnership that made all of it worthwhile. The mathematics of my ruin were already written. I just couldn't see the equation yet. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in late November, 15 months into the relationship. My savings account sitting at 11,000 euros. My pension carved up every month before it even hit my account. 400 to Han for her family's ongoing expenses, 300 for my rent, 200 for food if I ate cheap street food and skipped meals, 100 for utilities. The remaining 800 disappeared into miscellaneous costs and the occasional emergency that always seemed to appear right when I had a little breathing room. I hadn't been to the Friday expat gatherings in months. Couldn't afford the beer. Couldn't afford the questions. Couldn't afford to see the pity in Dave's eyes when he looked at me. I'd stopped talking to my daughter as frequently because I couldn't handle lying to her anymore about how great everything was. I'd lost weight, not the healthy kind. The kind that comes from stress and skipped meals and lying awake at night doing math that never works out. Han had become distant over the past 2 months. Always busy. Always stressed. We'd gone from seeing each other 3 times a week to maybe once, if I was lucky. She'd cancel plans last minute. Family emergency. Work crisis. Her son was sick. Her mother needed her. Always something. When we did see each other, she seemed distracted, on her phone constantly, making excuses to leave early. I told myself it was temporary. She was stressed about money despite all my help. Maybe I needed to do more. Be more understanding. Give her space. The thought that something else was going on felt too dangerous to examine. I'd invested 35,000 euros in 15 months of my life. Walking away meant admitting I'd destroyed my retirement for nothing. That Tuesday evening, I'd gone to a restaurant in the Haichao district for dinner. Nothing fancy. Just a local place where I could get a decent meal for $3. I was sitting alone eating comtam when I saw her, Han, at a table near the back, with a man, not just any man, a Western man, older than me, maybe 68, 70. Gray hair, expensive watch, linen shirt that probably cost more than my monthly rent. They were sitting close, intimate. She was touching his arm the way she used to touch mine in those early months, laughing at something he said, leaning in, that body language that's unmistakable when you've been on the receiving end of it. I sat frozen with my chopsticks halfway to my mouth, watching them. She didn't see me, was too focused on him, on performing the same show she'd performed for me, the attentive girlfriend, the sweet, struggling single mother who just needed a little help, the woman who made you feel like a hero. They finished their meal. She kissed him on the cheek. They left together. I waited 5 minutes, then followed them outside. Watched them get into a taxi. I got into another taxi and did something I'm not proud of. I followed them. The taxi took them to an apartment building in Thuong, the expensive area near my K beach where rents started at $800 a month. The building had a security guard, a lobby with marble floors. Not the modest family home in Hoakan district she'd described. Not anywhere close. They went inside together. His arm around her waist, her laughing at something. I sat in my taxi watching the building for 20 minutes before I told the driver to take me home. I paid him with money I didn't really have. Went up to my apartment, sat in the dark. My phone buzzed an hour later. A message from Han. Hi baby, sorry I've been so busy. Miss you, can we have dinner this weekend? I'll cook for you. I stared at that message until my eyes blurred. Read it over and over. The casual intimacy. The promise of cooking dinner. The performance continuing like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't just watched her with another man. Like I wasn't sitting in the dark doing the math on how thoroughly I'd been destroyed. I didn't respond that night. Just sat there as the hours passed and the city sounds filtered up through my windows. Motorbikes. Karaoke bars. Someone's television playing too loud. The soundtrack of the life I'd thought I was building. The next morning, I did something I should have done months earlier. I asked around. Carefully, quietly. Started with a Vietnamese guy named Tuan who worked at the coffee shop where I'd met Han. Asked if he knew her. If he knew anything about her family situation. Tuan got uncomfortable. Said he didn't want to get involved in expat relationship drama. I pressed. Told him I needed to know the truth. He finally admitted that Han was well known in certain circles. Had a reputation, multiple foreign boyfriends over the years. Always the same story. Family emergencies, sick mother, son's school fees. She was good at it, professional, not sloppy, like some of the other girls who worked the expat scene. One asked about the apartment building in Nthwang. Tuan hesitated, then said she lived there, had for at least 2 years, rented by one of her long-term sponsors, an Australian businessman who spent half his time in Vietnam. Probably the old guy I'd seen her with at the restaurant. Everything clicked into place with a clarity that felt like violence. The family home in Hoa Can district didn't exist, or if it did, she didn't live there. The sick mother, maybe real, maybe not. The son, possibly real, but possibly just a photo she kept on her phone for authenticity. The brother's motorbike accident. The father's medication. The school fees. The rent emergencies. The surgery. 35,000 euros worth of crises that may or may not have existed. And I wasn't her boyfriend. I was income stream number 3, maybe number 4. One of several foreign men paying into the operation of her life while she performed intimacy in gratitude and love. I went back to my apartment and pulled up my bank statements. Looked at every transfer to Han over 15 months. 37,000 euros total, more than I'd calculated. Somehow I'd been lying to myself, even about the numbers. My retirement savings had gone from 85,000 to 9,000. My pension was now insufficient to cover even my basic expenses because of the monthly commitments I'd made to her family's ongoing needs. The mathematics were brutal and simple. I'd given her roughly 2,500 euros a month for 15 months. For what? For the performance of companionship. For the illusion that someone needed me. For the ego boost of being her hero. For the desperate hope that I wasn't just another lonely old man getting fleeced in Southeast Asia. I couldn't afford my apartment anymore. The 300 euro place that had felt like such a bargain when I arrived. I started looking for cheaper options. Found a room in a local neighborhood for 120 euros a month. Shared bathroom, no air conditioning, thin walls. The kind of place I'd smugly avoided when I first arrived because I thought I was above that. I moved the following week, didn't tell anyone, just packed my things and left. The new room was small and hot and depressing. I could hear my neighbors fighting through the walls, could smell their cooking, could hear every motorbike that passed on the street below. This was my new reality. This was what 37,000 euros of stupidity bought you. I started seeing the other men, the broken ones. They were everywhere once I knew what to look for. The expats who'd disappeared from the Friday gatherings. The ones eating street food alone at cheap stalls. The ones living in the shitty rooms in local neighborhoods. We recognized each other. Had a way of nodding when we passed. A mutual acknowledgement of shared humiliation. I met Dave one afternoon at a coffee stall. He was living in a room even worse than mine. 70 euros a month. Been in Vietnam 7 years. Used to own a successful contracting business in Melbourne. Had a house. Investments. Retirement savings. Then he met a girl. Same story as mine, but stretched over 3 years instead of 15 months. She'd cleaned him out slowly and thoroughly. He couldn't afford to go back to Australia. Couldn't afford to stay in Vietnam. Just existing in this limbo of poverty and regret. He told me about the others. Roger the Brit who'd tried to kill himself was still around. Living on the outskirts of the city in a room that cost $50 a month. Working under the table at a bar for food money. His pension went entirely to debt back in the UK from loans he'd taken out to help his girlfriend's family. There was a Canadian named Jim who slept on another expat's couch because he couldn't even afford a room anymore. A German who'd sold everything back home and now had nothing. A Swede who was trying to teach English illegally because his pension wasn't enough to survive on after his girlfriend and her family's needs. The statistic started making perfect sense. 84.4% of Western retirees leave Vietnam broke. Not because Vietnam is expensive, because we come here broken already. Lonely. Desperate. Looking for something to fill the emptiness. And the ecosystem exists to extract every dollar from that desperation. The girls aren't the villains in this story. They're just doing what they need to do to survive and support their families in an economy that doesn't give them many options. The real villain is the lie we tell ourselves. That we're different. That our situation is unique. That the girl really loves us. That the family emergencies are real. That we're not just another stupid foreigner getting fleeced. I lasted 8 more months in Vietnam. 8 months of humiliation and poverty, and the crushing realization that I'd destroyed my retirement for an illusion. I ate one meal a day, street food, the cheapest things I could find. Lost 20 kilograms, started having health problems, high blood pressure, stress-related digestive issues. Couldn't afford to see a doctor. My daughter finally got the truth out of me when I couldn't hide it anymore. She was horrified, angry, heartbroken, sent me money for a plane ticket home. I didn't want to take it, but had no choice. I'd spent 37,000 euros on a lie and didn't even have enough left for a flight back to Rotterdam. I returned to the Netherlands in July, 3 years after I'd left, 21 months after meeting Han. I moved into my daughter's spare room in Amsterdam. She and her husband were kind about it, didn't make me feel like a burden, even though I obviously was. But I could see the disappointment in her eyes, the frustration, the quiet judgment she tried to hide. I was 63 years old and starting over with nothing. No savings, no apartment, no independence. My pension had to be restructured because of debt I'd accumulated in those final desperate months. I took a part-time job at a hardware store, 4 days a week, €8 an hour. At 63 years old, helping customers find the right screws and paint samples. That was 4 years ago. I'm 67 now, still living with my daughter and son-in-law. Still working at the hardware store, though the hours have been cut because my health isn't great. My retirement savings are gone. The comfortable future I'd planned is gone. The golden years are being spent in a spare bedroom contributing grocery money and trying not to be too much of an inconvenience. I think about Vietnam sometimes. Not about Han. She was just doing her job and she did it well. I think about the moment I decided to be vulnerable instead of careful. The moment I sat in that beachside cafe watching another expat with his girlfriend and thought, why not me? That's the moment that cost me everything. The lesson isn't complicated. When someone shows you who they are through their actions, believe them. When your instincts tell you something doesn't add up, listen. When friends with nothing to gain from lying warn you about patterns they've seen 100 times, take them seriously. When you find yourself making excuses for behavior you'd never tolerate in any other context, stop and ask why. But the deeper lesson is about knowing yourself. I didn't get scammed because Han was particularly clever. I got scammed because I was desperate and lonely and terrified of spending my remaining years invisible and alone. I ignored every red flag because accepting them would have meant going back to that emptiness. The illusion of love felt better than the reality of loneliness. That's the real mathematics of ruin. Not the girl, not the money, not the lies. The equation is your own desperation multiplied by your willingness to believe beautiful lies because ugly truths are too painful to face. Every dollar you give becomes another reason to keep giving, because walking away means admitting it was all wasted. The sunk cost fallacy destroys you slowly and thoroughly while you convince yourself you're investing in a future. I see the YouTube videos sometimes. The channels promoting retirement in Southeast Asia, making it look easy and affordable and full of possibility. Young guys with their cameras talking about how far your pension stretches, how friendly the locals are, how you can live like a king on Social Security. They're not lying exactly. You can live cheaply if you're careful, but they don't talk about the loneliness that drives men to make catastrophic decisions. Don't talk about the ecosystem that exists to exploit that loneliness. Don't talk about the statistics. 84.4% of Western retirees leave Vietnam broke. I'm one of them. Living in my daughter's spare room at 67, working part-time at a hardware store. My golden years reduced to trying not to be a burden while I wait out the rest of my life in a country that reminds me every day of everything I lost. The dream of retirement paradise isn't a lie, but it's only possible if you go there whole. If you go there broken and desperate and looking for something to fill the emptiness, the mathematics are already written. You'll spend everything you have trying to buy what can't be bought. And you'll end up exactly where I am. Broke. Ashamed. Warning other men who won't listen because they think they're different. They're not different. I wasn't different. The only difference is whether you learn the lesson before you lose everything or after. I learned after. I hope you're smarter than I was. But if the YouTube videos and expat forums are still full of men talking about retiring to paradise, I know most of you won't be. The mathematics don't lie. 84.4%. Remember that number when you're sitting in your apartment in Rotterdam or Melbourne or Vancouver thinking about warmth and possibility and a second chance at life. Remember that number when you meet the sweet girl who seemed different from all the others. Remember that number when the first family emergency appears. or don't remember it. Make the same mistakes I made. Join 84.4%. Either way, the mathematics will work themselves out. They always do. And when they're finished with you, you'll be exactly where I am. Broke and broken and wondering how you got so stupid so fast. That's the truth nobody wants to hear until it's too late to matter.